They sold her with the calm of people who had already decided she was finished. They said the word barren like it explained everything that mattered. And then one man stepped forward and said quietly, "I don't need children. I need you." Dust Creek, Wyoming Territory, April 13th, early evening. Spring had just begun to breathe across the prairie, the ground thawing in uneven patches, the air carrying the damp promise of things trying again. Lanterns swung from wooden poles around the town square, their yellow light catching on wagon rims slick with mud. Wheels creaked, horses snorted, and the mingled smells of roasted meat, hay, and wet earth pressed close in the cooling dusk. Farmers, traders, craftsmen, and townsfolk moved between tables stacked with leatherwork, iron tools, cattle brands, and small bouquets of wildflowers tied with twine. Laughter rose and fell, but beneath it ran the sharper music of commerce, coins clinking, murmured bargains, and the drawn-out call of going once, going twice. Eliza May stood at the edge of it all, her boots heavy with mud, her breath faintly visible in the cold evening air. She was 23, slender from years of making herself smaller, chestnut hair tucked beneath a faded bonnet whose ribbon had been mended more than once. Her eyes were wide, uncertain, carrying the weight of apologies she had never been allowed to finish speaking. A familiar ache sat between her brows, something like guilt, something like failure, something that had learned to live there. Behind her, her father, Tom May, cleared his throat. He straightened his shoulders as though posture alone might restore what debt had taken from him. Once a respected horse trader, now hollowed by bad seasons and worse luck, he stepped forward and presented his daughter the way he once presented livestock, palm open, voice raised. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, loud enough to pull attention from nearby stalls, "here we have a woman skilled in housekeeping, cooking, and needlework." Eliza felt the words hit her chest, one by one. "She cannot bear children," he continued, the sentence delivered with the practiced bluntness of a man who had repeated it often. "But if you need someone to stand by your hearth and keep a home, take a look." Whispers rippled outward. Men shifted in their dusty hats, elbows nudging ribs. Women drew children closer, skirts rustling. Tom pressed on, urgency creeping into his voice. "Cattle load," he said, forcing a rough smile. "Half the price of a steer. No grand promises. Just someone who knows how to keep a ranch running. Anyone willing to take her tonight?" Eliza swallowed hard. Her cheeks burned, the spring wind useless against the sting. She had tried everything once. Bitter teas, whispered prayers, remedies pressed into her hands by midwives who wouldn't meet her eyes. And when she failed to give her husband a child, she had been returned to her father's door the very day a younger woman arrived to take her place. Now she stood here, priced and spoken for before she could speak herself. Tom laid a small leather pouch of coins on the rough plank table, the sound final. The crowd quieted, curiosity tightening into expectation. Then a man stepped forward from the edge of the throng. Garrett Cole. Broad-shouldered, strong-jawed, 35 years carved deep by sun and loss. His face was weather-bronzed, lines etched by grief he never discussed. He was known in the county as a widower, his wife and only son taken by fever years ago, and as a man who kept to his land and away from idle talk. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn canvas sack, heavy with coins, and set it beside Tom's pouch. The sound drew a collective breath from the crowd. Garrett cleared his throat and leaned slightly toward Eliza. His voice was low, meant for her alone. "I don't need children," he said. "I need someone who knows how to stay." The coins clinked softly on the wood. Silence spread, thick and uncomfortable. Tom May's eyes darted between Garrett's face and the bag of money, relief warring with shame. He nodded once, curt and quick, as if afraid the moment might slip away. Eliza's heart pounded, unsure whether this was rescue or another kind of cage. She looked at Garrett, at the steadiness in his gaze, the kindness guarded but present. He offered no ring, no vow shouted for witnesses, only a quiet nod. The crowd exhaled and began to loosen, some turning away, others shifting as if embarrassed by what they had seen. Eliza remained still, boots anchored in the mud, bonnet trembling with her breath. Garrett turned toward his horse. Without looking back, he said softly, "If you're willing to stay," and walked away. The word echoed inside her. Stay. Stay and be valued, or stay and be owned. She glanced at her father, saw the pallor of regret he would never voice. Lanterns swayed as the square emptied, music fading into the hollow sounds of carts pulling out. Eliza took one step, then another. The leather of Garrett's saddle creaked. Horses stamped impatiently. She climbed into the wagon beside him, her heart heavy, her thoughts strangely quiet. As the lights of Dust Creek dimmed behind them, she studied Garrett's profile in the fading glow. Not a savior. Not a captor. Just a man who had offered a place to remain. And for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that staying might mean belonging. Coal Ranch, on the outskirts of Dust Creek, early May. The wind there carried no laughter. It swept steady and dry across open fields, stirring grass still stiff from winter. The house stood tall but tired, weathered timber darkened by years of sun and storm, windows holding a silence louder than spoken grief. Eliza sat rigid in the wagon as they passed through the gate. Neither of them had spoken since Dust Creek, and neither had tried. Horses nickered softly, hooves thudding against dry ground. Garrett dismounted first when they reached the house and offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm without demand. On the porch, a rocking chair moved gently in the breeze. The door creaked open and an older woman appeared, gray hair pulled back, shawl wrapped tight, eyes sharp with suspicion. She said nothing at first, simply measured Eliza from bonnet to boots. Garrett broke the silence. "Mother, this is Eliza. She'll be living here." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Living?" she asked. "What for?" "To help," Garrett replied evenly. "That's all." She sniffed and turned away. Inside, the house was clean and joyless. No portraits, no toys, only order and absence. Garrett showed Eliza to a small room at the end of the hall. "Guest room," he said. "Sheets are clean. You'll find what you need." He lingered, then returned with a folded wool coat, soft and worn, embroidered with fading flowers. "My wife wore this," he said quietly, setting it on the bed. "Thought you might need it." Eliza brushed the seams with her fingers. "Thank you." He paused again. "You're not here to replace anyone." "I won't ask that." That night, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the wind press the windows, the floorboards sigh. She noticed a hot brick wrapped in cloth beneath the bed, still warm. Someone had thought of her. Days passed without ceremony. Eliza worked steadily, sweeping, mending, tending chickens. She did not laugh, but no one stopped her from trying. At breakfast, Garrett spoke little. His mother watched her with a fox's patience. One morning, the older woman finally spoke. "You don't smile much." Eliza looked up from the stove. "I wasn't brought here to smile." "No," the woman said. "You were brought here because no one else would have you." Eliza said nothing. She finished cooking and left the room. That afternoon, she found a weathered swing hanging from a tree behind the house. She sat, hands gripping the plank, eyes distant. Garrett came later, pail in hand. "Chickens need you tomorrow," he said. "I'll be riding out." She nodded. He hesitated. "Mother's set on bloodlines," he said. "Thinks I'm just holding space." "I don't," she murmured. "I don't either," he replied. That night, Eliza sat at her window, the wool coat around her shoulders, the hot brick warming her feet. The barn lantern swayed outside. Silence filled the house, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like waiting. By midsummer, the fields turned gold. Days grew long. That was when Eliza began gathering the children. They came to the loft behind the barn, sitting on crates and burlap cushions. Garrett said nothing, but his wagon tracks widened, reaching farms beyond. She taught letters, read stories, let laughter return in small, careful ways. One afternoon, she burned the biscuits. Garrett only said, "Better burned bread than a burned spirit." That night, his mother told her the house was full of strangers. Eliza climbed the hill behind the house and stood until the moon rose. Garrett joined her, offering an ivory-handled comb. "Just be Eliza," he said. She stayed. By early November, whispers followed her into town. Parents stopped sending children. Eliza waited on the porch each morning, then turned back inside. One cold afternoon, a drunk man confronted her near the mill. Garrett arrived without a word, lifted her into the saddle, and rode her home. "People talk," he said quietly. "You understand what I need." That night, Eliza closed the school ledger, not in defeat, but in resolve. The rains came hard and unending. While clearing an old shed, she found the Cole family ledger. Names written and crossed out. She found Garrett's, his wife's, his child's. A blank line waited. She did not write her name. That night, Garrett fell ill. Eliza stayed by his side, changing cloths, waiting. Before dawn, she placed the ledger and a pen on the table beside his bed. She did not write. When he woke, he read and wrote instead. "Eliza, not born of blood, but chosen still." The storm broke. At supper, he poured tea into an old ceramic dish and set it before her. They said nothing, but the meaning settled between them like warmth. The morning that followed the breaking storm arrived quietly, as though the land itself was unsure whether it was allowed peace yet. Pale light slipped over the hills and settled into the low places, catching on puddles that mirrored the sky in broken pieces. Eliza rose before the house stirred, her movements careful, almost reverent. She brewed coffee, set bread to warm, and stood at the window while steam curled upward, thinking of the words Garrett had written and the way they had lodged inside her chest. Chosen still. The phrase felt heavier than a promise and gentler than a vow. When Garrett joined her, his step slower than usual, she handed him a cup without a word. He took it, their fingers brushing briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, steady and real. They did not speak of sickness, or storms, or ledgers. They spoke instead of weather and fence lines, of a mare due to foal, of the creek running high. Ordinary things, chosen carefully, as if both understood that ordinary was the greatest gift they had been given. The days found a new rhythm after that. Not louder, not brighter, but fuller. Eliza worked in the shed again, driven by an idea she could not put aside. The rain had softened the earth, and the shed smelled of damp wood and old iron, but she cleaned it anyway, scrubbing the floor, patching gaps, pulling light through the cracked windows. She imagined children there again, not because she needed to fill a silence, but because the silence itself had begun to feel unnecessary. Garrett noticed the changes without comment. One evening, she returned from the shed to find a stack of planed boards leaning against the wall and a crate of nails set neatly beside them. He was at the table, repairing a bridle, his hands steady. "Thought you might need these," he said simply. She nodded, throat tight, and went back out with renewed purpose. By late autumn, the shed had become something else entirely. A place of warmth and intention. Garrett built benches in the evenings, his hammer tapping softly in the dark, lantern light swinging. Eliza stitched cushions from old sacks, filling them with straw and scraps of wool. She chalked letters on a board she salvaged from the barn, the marks clean and hopeful. When the first child arrived again, it was tentative, a small girl with braids too tight and eyes too cautious. Eliza welcomed her without questions. The next day, 2 more came, then another. Word traveled quietly, carried by children themselves rather than parents. The shed filled again, laughter thin but real, like birdsong after rain. Garrett's mother watched from the porch, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, but she did not stop it either. Winter approached with the certainty of something long promised. Frost crept into the mornings, turning fields silver. Eliza woke one dawn with a strange heaviness, a pull low in her belly that made her pause mid-step. She leaned against the doorframe, breathing slowly until it passed. She told herself it was fatigue, nothing more. She had been tired before. The days grew shorter. Children arrived bundled in scarves, stamping snow from their boots before settling onto benches. Eliza's voice carried through the shed, teaching sums and letters, reading stories aloud while snow pressed against the windows. Garrett built shelves for books he ordered from town, their spines mismatched and worn, but treasured. He carved small chairs for the youngest children, each one sturdy, each one marked beneath the seat with Eliza's initials. She noticed only later, running her fingers along the carving, feeling something inside her shift. One afternoon, she nearly fainted while writing on the board. The room spun, the chalk slipping from her hand. A child cried out, and Garrett was there suddenly, lifting her before she hit the floor. He carried her home, his jaw tight, his steps fast. The doctor came hours later, snow clinging to his coat. He listened, examined, asked questions that made Eliza's heart race. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "She's with child," he said. "About 11 weeks. Silence followed, thick and trembling. Eliza stared at the floor, tears spilling unchecked. "I was told I could never," she whispered. The doctor nodded once. "Then now you can." Garrett did not move at first. Then he knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his, rough palms warm. He did not smile, did not shout. His eyes shone with something deeper, something reverent. "We'll do this steady," he said. "No rushing. No fear." The weeks that followed were careful and bright. Garrett planted pear saplings near the porch, 3 slender trees wrapped against frost. Hope Orchard, he called them, half smiling when she teased him for naming things too soon. Eliza rested more, read books borrowed from town, traced lullabies under her breath. Children brought her drawings, babies wrapped in quilts, hearts too big for small bodies. She pinned them to the wall, each one a reminder of how love multiplied when shared. Winter broke slowly that year, snow retreating inch by inch. The orchard bud swelled. Eliza's strength waned and returned in waves. Garrett stayed close, his presence a quiet anchor. When labor came, it came fierce and sudden, storm winds howling outside as if the sky itself remembered how to rage. The doctor was delayed. Garrett steadied her, his voice low and constant, guiding her through each moment. When the child finally cried, the sound cut through the storm like light. A girl, strong lunged and fierce, eyes already searching. Garrett held them both, tears streaking his face. "She's brave," he murmured. "Brave enough to come." He opened the family ledger with trembling hands and wrote her name beneath Eliza's. Clara. Daughter of faith and choosing. Spring arrived in earnest then. Pear blossoms drifted on the breeze. The schoolhouse thrived, children running up the path calling Eliza Mama without thinking, without fear. Garrett built more shelves, more benches. The house filled with warmth and noise. One quiet afternoon, a rider approached carrying a satchel marked with the town seal. Garrett read the letter, jaw tightening. Eliza found it later on the table, curiosity pulling her toward it. Verification of land ownership. Legal names required. She felt the old uncertainty stir. That night, Garrett placed the paper between them. "If you want your name there, write it," he said. She did, carefully, as co-owner, by choice. The next day, she found the document framed on the wall. "Most folks frame weddings," Garrett said. "We'll frame choice." Late summer brought a visitor in a black carriage, polished and wrong against the dust. Eliza recognized him at once, her former husband, grief and regret etched deep. He spoke of mistakes, of understanding too late. He offered her a pouch, a promise. She refused, her voice steady. You came too late. Garrett stood beside her, hand on her shoulder. She was never returned, he said quietly. The man left, the dust settling behind him like an ending. Winter fell early again, but this time the house glowed with light. The school kept its name. Clara grew, toddling between benches. The orchard bloomed. Love rooted itself deep, the valley changed its character once Clara learned to walk. It was not a loud change, not something a stranger might notice at first glance, but it settled into the land the way roots settle into soil. Mornings began with small, uneven footsteps across wooden floors, with Eliza's voice rising soft and instinctive, not teaching letters now but soothing cries, singing half-remembered hymns and lullabies stitched together from memory. Garrett moved through the house more gently than before, his large frame careful around corners, his hands learning new shapes of work. He fixed gates with Clara balanced on his hip, showed her how to grip the railings of the porch, let her tug at his beard until she laughed herself breathless. The orchard grew alongside her. The pear trees took hold, their leaves glossy, their branches stretching wider each season. Garrett watered them faithfully, even during dry spells, even when neighbors said it was foolish to coddle saplings in uncertain soil. Eliza watched him from the porch more than once, Clara asleep against her shoulder, and understood that he was not tending trees. He was tending faith. The schoolhouse remained full. Children came from farther out now, some riding ponies too big for them, some walking miles before dawn. They brought siblings, cousins, neighbors' children. No one asked permission anymore. The whispers that once followed Eliza's name still existed, but they had lost their teeth. They passed through town and dissolved against the sound of children reading aloud, against the sight of Garrett hauling lumber to build another bench, against the quiet proof of a woman who stayed and made something grow. Garrett's mother changed more slowly. She watched Clara from a distance at first, her expression guarded, as if afraid affection might betray old loyalties. But time wore her down in the way only time can. One afternoon, Eliza found her seated on the porch, Clara in her lap, the child's small fingers tangled in silver hair. The old woman did not look up when Eliza approached. She's stubborn, she said instead. Like her father. Eliza smiled softly. So I've noticed. The woman shifted, her grip tightening just enough to be protective. Blood's not the only thing that stays, she muttered. It was not an apology, but it was something closer to peace than Eliza had ever expected. Seasons turned. Clara learned her letters in the same shed where Eliza had once feared no one would come. She traced words in chalk, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, surrounded by children who were not bound to her by anything except love and habit. They called Garrett Papa without thinking, and he answered without hesitation. He never corrected them. He never explained. Some things did not need explaining. One evening, years later, as autumn painted the hills gold and rust, Garrett found Eliza standing at the fence, watching the children run through fallen leaves. Her hands rested on the worn wood, her face thoughtful. You ever regret it? He asked quietly. She turned to him, surprised. Regret what? Staying, he said. Choosing this. Eliza looked back toward the yard, toward Clara laughing, toward the schoolhouse warm with lamplight. No, she said simply. I regret the years I thought staying meant disappearing. He nodded, understanding settling between them like dusk. Trouble came again, as it always does, not with drama but with paperwork and quiet threats. A man from the territory arrived with documents and stiff manners, questioning land lines, ownership, schooling without sanction. He spoke of rules and compliance, of proper institutions. Garrett listened, calm as ever. Eliza stood beside him, her hand steady on his arm. These children are fed, she said. They are taught. They are safe. The man frowned, and used to resistance that did not raise its voice. Weeks later, approval came through, begrudging and official. The schoolhouse stood recognized, not because it fit neatly into law, but because it could no longer be ignored. Winter returned, softer this time. Snow fell without fury, blanketing the land gently. Clara grew strong and sure-footed, her laughter carrying across the fields. Eliza felt her own strength deepen, no longer fragile, no longer borrowed. She belonged here, not because she had proven anything, but because she had chosen and been chosen in return. One night, long after the house had gone quiet, Eliza took out the family ledger again. She read the names slowly, tracing the lines Garrett had written years before. She added nothing. She did not need to. The proof was all around her, in breathing bodies, in warm light behind windows, in a life that had grown from what others once called barren. She closed the book and placed it back in its chest, satisfied. Outside, the wind moved through the orchard, branches creaking softly. Inside, Garrett slept with Clara curled against his side, one large hand resting protectively on her back. Eliza watched them for a long moment, then turned out the lamp. She did not wonder anymore whether she belonged. She knew. Some stories do not end when the hardest part is over. They settle. They deepen. They keep breathing long after the storm has passed. The valley had learned that lesson by the time Clara turned 6, her footsteps confident on paths once worn only by doubt. Morning light came gently now, sliding over the hills and catching on the pear trees heavy with fruit, their branches bending low as if offering thanks. Eliza woke before the house, as she always had, but the ache that once greeted her days was gone. In its place lived a quiet steadiness, the kind earned through years of choosing to remain. She moved through the kitchen, setting water to boil, laying out bread, pausing once to look out the window at the schoolhouse where lamplight still glowed faintly from the night before. The children had stayed late, reading aloud, refusing to let the story end where the book did. Garrett joined her without sound, his presence familiar as the floor beneath her feet. He kissed the top of her head, a gesture so natural now it no longer startled her heart into racing. Outside, Clara ran barefoot through dew-damp grass, her laughter carrying across the yard, calling to children already arriving at the gate. The sign carved years ago hung steady despite wind and weather. Not from blood, from love. And sometimes love brings life. The world had tested those words more than once. It tested them again the day a sickness swept through neighboring farms, taking cattle first, then men, then women. Fear returned to town like an unwelcome guest, whispering that it always came back for those who had dared to hope. Eliza opened the schoolhouse anyway. She washed hands, boiled water, kept children close. Garrett rode out with supplies, his face set, his voice calm when others faltered. Nights grew long again, filled with worry and candlelight, but they were not alone as they once had been. Neighbors came, bringing what they could, asking not for permission but for guidance. Eliza found herself standing at the center of it all, not because she demanded it, but because she had become something people leaned toward when the ground felt unsure. When the sickness passed, as all storms eventually do, the valley breathed out together. Loss had come, but so had care, and something stronger than fear remained behind. The schoolhouse filled again. The orchard yielded fruit sweeter than any season before. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in copper and rose, Garrett took Eliza's hand and led her out to the trees. Clara followed, solemn and curious. Beneath the largest pear tree, Garrett stopped. He did not kneel. He did not reach for a ring. He simply said, "This is home. I never needed paper to know that. But I want the world to see what we've built." Eliza looked at him, really looked, at the man who had asked her to stay when staying felt like the hardest thing in the world. She nodded once. That was enough. The gathering that followed was small and imperfect and exactly right. No altar, no lace, no polished speeches. Just neighbors, children, laughter, and a table heavy with food grown from their own land. Someone played a fiddle slightly out of tune. Clara scattered petals with serious concentration. Garrett and Eliza stood side by side and spoke promises not borrowed from any book, but shaped from years of shared silence and shared work. When it was done, nothing changed, and everything did. Winter came again, but it found the house ready. Snow pressed against the windows while inside, stories were told, lessons learned, hands held. The schoolhouse became a refuge during storms, its benches worn smooth by generations of small bodies who had learned they're not just letters, but belonging. Eliza grew older, her hair threaded with silver, her laughter deeper, easier. Garrett's steps slowed, but his hands remained steady. Clara grew into a young woman who carried her mother's quiet strength and her father's calm resolve. She chose her own path, as she had been taught, knowing she always had a place to return. Years later, when the ledger was opened one final time, Eliza's name stood where it always had, unchanged and complete. Not as an afterthought. Not as a correction. But as the beginning of something that had rewritten the meaning of family in that valley. And so the house stood, windows lit against the dark, orchard blooming, children's voices echoing across fields once marked by silence. Proof that a heart declared barren can still bear the richest harvest, if given the chance to stay. Not every love story needs a wedding. Some only need a roof, a name spoken softly, and a hand that does not let go when the world tries to pull it away.